Apollo astronauts Roger Chaffee, Edward White, and Gus Grissom lose their lives in a tragic flash fire aboard their grounded space capsule. The tragedy occurred during a simulated countdown for the first flight of the Apollo program, whose goal is to put a man on the moon by 1970.
This is Mike Wallace at the CBS Newsroom in New York. America's first 3 Apollo astronauts were trapped and killed by a flash fire that swept their moonship early tonight during a launch pad test at Cape Kennedy in Florida.
Now, what I have in my hand now is where the accident occurred this afternoon. This is the launch escape tower, which, if this had happened on a launch day prior to flight, an abort such as that occurred today, the thought here would have been that the launch escape tower would have taken the spacecraft, this is the command module where the 3 astronauts actually fly, would have taken them safely away from any blow-ups. However, the type of accident that occurred today, this was an internal fire in here caused by oxygen, which we'll talk about in a second. The spacecraft today was in a fully pressurized system. This means 100% oxygen. The speculation tonight, and again I must say it's speculation only, is that there was some electrical problem, possibly with some plastic wires or something of that nature, but this is speculation purely, that an electrical short circuit occurred, and of course I think everyone knows what would happen in the event of an electrical short circuit in a 100% oxygen state. That's our speculation as of the moment, Mike.
The 3 men were to have gone up on February 21st for a 14-day
upwards, that's right, Mike, upwards of 2 weeks. Our guess was that it was going to be a 10 or an 11-day flight, but they were scheduled for a 2-week flight.
So far as the possibility of a catastrophic failure bother you at all, sir?
No, you sort of have to put that out of your mind. There's always a possibility that you can have a catastrophic failure, of course. This can happen on any flight. It can happen on the last one as well as the first one. So you just plan as best you can to take care of all of these eventualities. And you get a well-trained crew and you go fly.
Is there anything scary about a first space flight, even though you've flown many hours in conventional aircraft, jet aircraft?
Oh, I don't like to say anything scary about it. There's a lot of unknowns, of course, and a lot of problems that could develop or might develop, and they'll have to be solved. And that's what we're there for. This is our business, to find out if this thing will work for us. I don't think it'll be probably a whole lot worse than a guy that's making a first test flight on a new airplane. Now, I've never done that, so I don't know. I think everybody feels a little apprehensive when they count down. I don't see how you could help but be a little bit excited. But I don't think anybody is, I don't like to use the word scary. I definitely think you're apprehensive and you're considering what's involved there. You're thinking about it. But you know how to handle it and take care of it and do the job.
At 10:30 tonight Eastern Time, rescue teams began to remove the bodies of the 3 astronauts from the charred spacecraft, perched 200 feet above Launch Pad 34. A NASA spokesman said the dead astronauts were left in the ship for 4 hours to aid the investigation into the tragedy. The latest news from NASA about the accident on Pad 34 that caused the death of the 3 astronauts. The pad safety crew was onto the pad and up to the tower about 10 to 15 minutes after the first indication of trouble late this afternoon. The flash fire occurred at 6:31 Eastern Standard Time. The smoke at that point, though, was so intense that the rescue crew, wearing masks, suffered smoke inhalation in spite of the masks. There were 27 men at the pad. 25 of the men suffered bad smoke inhalation, but evidently they're all right. 2 are still under observation. 3 doctors in the blockhouse dashed up as soon as conditions allowed, but by then it was too late to save the crew.
Hey, how are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between 3 buildings? I can't hear a thing you're saying. Jesus Christ. Again? But how are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings?
The Apollo program almost ended before it even got off the ground. In the mid-1960s, NASA was working at breakneck speed, attempting to take another step towards President John F. Kennedy's goal to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. The top part of the rocket was where several major systems lived, including the Apollo spacecraft, known as the Command Service Module, or CSM. The command module was considered the mothership, with the goal of carrying the astronauts to space and then returning them safely to Earth. Inside were 3 compartments, including the sealed crew cabin, which only had about 6 cubic meters of space. With all the operational displays, crew couches, and equipment, there was very little room left over for the astronauts to maneuver. The purpose of the flight was to test launch operations, ground tracking and control facilities, and the performance of the Saturn 1B rocket and the CSM spacecraft.
It's also a time for courage, and if that sounds trite, I'll change the words to guts. The thing that these fellows said on the film you showed earlier, the things that everybody in the space program has been saying tonight and have been quoted from Webb on down, that this is a test program. We knew it was a test program, and these guys who went into it knew it was a test program. And a test program with equipment of this nature, as with airplanes or boats or submarines or anything where you're operating in a hostile environment, which space is, and this was a hostile environment even if they were on the ground because of this pure oxygen and all the rest of these things. This program is bound to claim its victims.
Early on in their training, Grissom and the rest of the crew voiced concerns with the spacecraft, primarily with the amount of flammable material in the cabin. The astronauts jokingly presented this crew portrait to the Apollo spacecraft program office manager after he gave the spacecraft a passing grade. But the thing is, the astronauts weren't alone in their concerns. In fact, some experts believed the immense pressure of Kennedy's deadline forced NASA and the contractor, North American Aviation, to make decisions that sacrificed safety. One of the main concerns was NASA's decision to opt for a single gas environment inside the capsule over a dual gas environment because it required a lighter system.
This early version of the Apollo space capsule was loaded with problems, and this launch pad test had not been going well. In the middle of a host of other glitches, some exposed wiring underneath Grissom's seat caused a spark, which in a capsule full of pure oxygen blew into flames. Problem was, this was also an early version of the command module hatch. It was complicated, very slow to open under the best of circumstances, and as internal cabin pressure mounted, it jammed that hatch in place while toxic smoke killed Grissom, White, and Roger Chaffee within seconds.
That caused many to question President Kennedy's deadline to put a man on the moon. All the progress NASA had made was blinded by tragedy. The investigation of the Apollo 1 fire forced a hold on the space program. The hard lessons learned from this mission would dictate new stringent checks and balances that would inform all NASA missions to follow, ultimately changing the nation's path to the moon.
So, to sum up, America's first 3 Apollo astronauts were trapped and killed by a flash fire that swept their Apollo spacecraft early tonight in a launch pad test at Cape Kennedy. Gus Grissom, Ed White, and rookie astronaut Roger Chaffee, training for his first space flight. A flight scheduled for February 21st, now postponed indefinitely. The 3 men aboard their spacecraft 10 minutes from a simulated liftoff when a flash fire hit at 6:31 tonight Eastern Standard Time. They were in their spacesuits, buttoned up inside the spacecraft when the fire hit. There was a flash, and that was it, according to a NASA spokesman watching the television screen in the blockhouse just a few hundred yards from the launch pad. President Johnson tonight mourned the death of the 3 astronauts. He said that they gave their lives in the nation's service.